Looks like it's that time, and we got to talk about the Venus retrograde. So it's been a year and a half. Last time we had a Venus retrograde was back in May of 2020, and now here we are with the Venus retrograde in Capricorn. That's happening from December of 2021 until January of 2022. And in this video, I'm going to be going over all the important days and the events of the Venus retrograde. We're going to be explaining what a retrograde even is, what it means, what it's going to look like, how to deal with it, and most importantly, how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. Well, before I start talking about all of the specifics of this retrograde, I should probably first explain what a retrograde is. A retrograde is when a planet, in this case Venus, appears to be moving backwards when in reality it's still moving forward. Backwards is clockwise and forward is counterclockwise. So if we were to draw the zodiac, we put Aries, Taurus, Gemini. I know I'm a really good drawer. A planet moving forward would be going counterclockwise. So when a planet goes retrograde, it looks like it's moving clockwise. Now, this is just an optical illusion, all fun and games, right? How this would look if we were to actually look at this in an astronomical perspective is, in this case, Venus moving direct would be Venus coming from the other side of the sun, moving counterclockwise. This is direct motion. Everything's fine and dandy. And then Venus will build up and up and up and come closer and closer to the Earth until she becomes the evening star. Notice that Venus got bigger. Venus came closer towards Earth. Venus would be getting brighter and become the evening star. So you would see Venus setting in the west after sunset. Venus would eventually then start to slow down and then eventually enter shadow because Venus will then start to retrograde. This is usually when Venus enters shadow. This is usually when the Venus retrogrades typically begin. Or I should say the Venus retrograde themes typically begin. Then Venus will actually begin to move backwards and actually enter the retrograde phase. This is when Venus appears to be moving backwards, again, going clockwise. And then we have the halfway point. That is the retrograde Cazimi. This is when a planet is in between the sun and the Earth. More specifically, either when Venus and Mercury is in between the sun and the Earth. But you could think of this as a reset point in the retrograde phase. You could think of this as the planet kind of cleaning up its energy, resetting its energy, so to say. Then Venus will continue to move backwards until it stations direct and becomes the morning star. So if you wake up before sunrise, you'll see Venus rising, and I have a visual for that. We're going to talk about that, so don't worry about it. And pretty much when Venus stations direct, this is right where Venus comes back to where it entered shadow. Venus comes back to that degree and stations direct, and then begins to move forward once again. Everything's fine again once Venus goes in direct motion. And how this would look from like a bird's eye perspective is if we're looking up here like this, right? Being direct, Venus would be on the other side of the sun, come over, become the evening star, and then station retrograde, come in between the sun and the Earth. We have that Cazimi point. And then she'll continue to move backwards, continue to move retrograde, station direct, and then continue to move forward. From when she stations direct and moves forward to when she stations retrograde, that's like a year and a half, pretty much. That's the majority of the time, right? And then Venus only spends so long actually being retrograde. So now that we know what a retrograde is, let's take a look at how this Venus retrograde specifically is going to look. Now, here's Venus. Venus is going to go through Sagittarius and then enter Capricorn. And then Venus is going to hit 11 degrees Capricorn. This is important because this is when Venus enters shadow. This is happening on November 18th, 2021. You can kind of pretty much pretend that this is essentially when the Venus retrograde will really start because this is when you're going to start seeing the Venus retrograde themes really begin. This happens again on November 18th. Venus will hit 11 degrees Capricorn. That means she's going to enter shadow. So she'll come over this way, station retrograde, move backwards, come over the spot again, and then again, move forward once more. Then Venus will keep moving forward. She'll be in shadow until we get to December 19th, almost exactly a full month later. That is when Venus is going to hit 26 degrees Capricorn. She'll come up to 26 degrees Capricorn, slow down, stop at 26 degrees Capricorn, and then station retrograde and begin to move backwards. Again, This is when Venus stations retrograde. This is when all of the retrograde things actually happen. So like Venus entering shadow is like the context begins versus Venus retrograde is like the, events that a retrograde is known for really kind of starts. And again, this is happening at 26 Capricorn on December 19th. It's also conjoining Pluto, but we're going to talk about that a little later. Then the halfway point, again, is that Venus Cazimi. This is when Venus will go in between the sun and the earth. This is kind of like restarting the Venus cycle, essentially. And this is happening at 18 degrees Capricorn. And this is happening in the next year on January 8th, 2022. Again, this is kind of the middle point of the retrograde phase. And then Venus will continue to move backwards until she slows down and stations direct again at 11 degrees Capricorn. Remember, that's where she originally entered shadow in, but she stations direct on January 29th, 2022, almost an exact month later. So Venus is really retrograde for a little bit over a month. And she'll station direct with Mars now in Capricorn. We're going to talk about that. So the Venus will move forward, continue to go through shadow, and then Venus will leave shadow. That means she'll go back to the point where she stationed retrograde, which is 26 Capricorn. That's not going to happen until March 1st, March 2nd of 2022. So even though Venus is really only retrograde from like the end of December into January and pretty much all of January, Venus entering shadow, which is again on November 18th, that really starts the themes of it. And the themes of the Venus retrograde, the whole shebang, it really doesn't end until March 1st, March 2nd. And that's when Venus goes back over the degree that she stationed retrograde with. And this one's a big deal too, because it's going to be conjoining Mars and Pluto. Now, you won't be able to see Pluto with your naked eye, but you will be able to see Mars with your naked eye. And that will look really cool. And that's going to completely change the picture of this Venus retrograde. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The big thing I want to hit on real quick is this isn't actually a representation of what you would see outside. And that's really crucial, kind of understanding a Venus retrograde and what it means, right? Like a lot of astrology is based on, what we kind of see visually. So this isn't actually how, like what you would see. That's because Venus, along with Mercury, are interior planets. So they're in between the sun and the earth, right? That pretty much means that you're never going to see let's say if you go outside at midnight, you'll never see Venus in the sky or Mercury in the sky. Venus or Mercury, since they're interior planets, will only ever be like an evening star or a morning star. So you'll only ever be able to see them during sunrise and sunset. So what this means is pretty much, here's the sun, right? And for scale, this is kind of like where you would see Mercury if you were to go and look for Mercury. Which is like super hard to see all the time. But if we zoom out a little bit, this is what Venus would essentially look like if you were to go outside before Venus stations retrograde. This is when Venus is about 48 degrees away from the sun. This is her max elongation. This really started around October 13th of 2021, and pretty much continued until Venus like retrograded. But this is her as evening star, right? She hits that max elongation 48 degrees away from the sun. That's as far away that she can get from the sun. Because again, if we're looking at this from the right perspective, Venus is kind of like making an orbit around like that, right? Anyway, so then Venus will have her max elongation. She'll be really far away, and then she'll start to get closer and closer to the sun, or I should say the sun will get closer and closer to Venus. So if you were to go outside every night at sunset, you would see Venus being closer and closer to the sun until Venus actually appears to be retrograde. So Venus will station retrograde, right? And she'll be conjoined Pluto. You won't be able to see Pluto, but she'll station retrograde and move backwards and then conjoin the sun. When she's conjoining the sun, you can't really see her, right? That's why she's kind of like being reborn, kind of being purged out when Venus conjoins the sun. So what that looks like is, let's go ahead and pretend that this is the morning time and that we're facing the east, right? And this is sunrise. You won't be able to see Venus for a little while until Venus becomes the morning star. Venus is going to appear as the morning star somewhere between mid-January, and that's when she's going to station direct and begin to move forward on the zodiac this way, but still get further and further away from the sun. The sun will be moving farther and farther from Venus. And at this point, you'll be able to see Mars too. And then once Venus stations direct and actually appears as the morning star, then Venus will hit max elongation as morning star somewhere around the beginning of March. Again, that's when Venus is out of shadow, and you'll be able to see Venus with Mars right here. Mars is visible to the naked eye, so that will be super, super cool. Make sure you go and see that. So this is what it would essentially look like, right? Venus would move backwards, station direct at 11 degrees Capricorn. That's going to be again on January 29th, 2022. You'll see Mars there, and then they'll move forward again through shadow, and this will be again Venus's max elongation as morning star. She'll be super bright. You'll see her with Mars, but again, you won't see Pluto. And then Venus will actually leave shadow, and we'll be wrapped up with this whole thing by March 1st, March 2nd of 2022. So now that we pretty much know what exactly is going on, you're probably wondering, Cameron, what does a retrograde even mean? I don't get it. So let's talk about that real quick. What a retrograde basically means is it's signifying a change that a planet is making, right? Think of like going outside and looking at a planet and thinking, what might that symbolize? It might symbolize a change, right? Kind of easy thinking. It signifies a change that a certain planet is making. So for example, a Mercury retrograde. I'm going to go ahead and assume that most of us here know what a Mercury retrograde is, so I won't go over and explain that. But a Mercury retrograde might be a change in perception or a change in thought or a change in communication, right? The big key here with being retrograde is redoing things, rethinking things, re-examining things, things that are related to Mercury. So essentially what a retrograde means is to do things over again and actually go backwards, because again, the planet is moving backwards, right? So to understand what a Venus retrograde means, I think we first need to really understand Venus. Venus is best probably understood by understanding the two signs that she rules, and that's going to be Taurus and Libra. Understanding Venus from a zodiac perspective might give us a little bit of clues of what to look for in a Venus retrograde, right? And this is also going to help us later when I go over how the Venus retrograde is going to affect each one of you or each one of the zodiac signs. So from the perspective of Taurus, Venus rules things like tangible goods, personal items, valuables, right? Taurus is a earth sign, so think tangible, physical thing. Venus in Taurus, or I should say Taurus, is going to rule things like safety, abundance, growth, right? Think of springtime. Everything's growing. Everything's beautiful. Venus loves and lives for that type of stuff. Venus rules things like pleasure and indulgence and sensation. And I'm bringing this up with Taurus because I want to bring up the fact that the moon is exalted in Taurus. And notice that a lot of these words are really lunar, like, like literally feeling safe or personal items and sensation, very lunar, right? Very touchy-feely. Venus is all about that. But we can also understand Venus through her other home sign of Libra. Libra is going to rule over things like relationships, flirting, connection. Venus has one main signification is to bring connection, to bring things together. In Libra, Venus rules fairness and peace, aesthetics, and what's really important about certain aesthetics is that there's usually some type of rule to apply. Like for example, with feng shui, that typically has a set of rules to adhere to. Venus also rules love and music and games and all of the fun stuff, right? And what's funny about love and relationships and games is that they all require some type of rule or some type of serious thing to it, right? Saturn is exalted in Libra. And so that kind of gives us a little bit of a clue of how to understand Venus. And the whole reason I'm bringing Saturn being exalted in Libra up is because Venus is going to be in Capricorn. But let's just reiterate what Venus actually represents. Venus is going to represent values and valuables. Venus is going to be a main significator for relationships, for pleasure and fun and sex. Venus is going to represent peace, harmony, and agreements, and looks, beauty, and aesthetics. But I really want to focus on the values thing, right? Like, what is actually valuable to you? What do you enjoy? Now, Venus is going to be in the sign of Capricorn. So to understand that, we kind of have to break down Capricorn, right? In order to break down Capricorn, we should probably understand Saturn a little bit more. So let's go ahead and talk about Saturn and what Saturn signifies. Saturn's going to signify things like rules and regulations, authorities, laws, systems, right? Saturn, governs everything. Saturn is, very old and wise, right? But Saturn is more specifically going to rule laws and systems, how things go, right? The actual system. Saturn is cold and dry, right? Think of wintertime here in North America during Capricorn and Aquarius season. Everything's very cold, and if you're like me and live in the desert, it is a little dry. Saturn also is a natural significator for maturity and commitment, right? Saturn also rules things like time and tradition and things being classic, right? Saturn doesn't like, Saturn's what, is going to hold over long periods of time. Now let's understand Saturn from the Capricorn perspective. Capricorn is an earth sign, right? It's cardinal. So it's going to deal with material rules or material walls or material boundaries. Saturn, or I should say Capricorn, is a cardinal sign, right? So it's much more initiatory, it's much more ambitious, and it's much more of a planner. I can't emphasize enough of Capricorn being about like the tangible, like things that could be a boundary or a tangible wall. Now, again, Venus is going to be retrograding in Capricorn. So let's kind of start putting two and two together here. If Venus rules value and pleasure, and a retrograde is about changing or redoing things, and Capricorn rules, systems, and structure, I don't know. I think maybe it rules. This Venus retrograde is going to be like about really changing the rules in which we play the game by. And I'm going to use this analogy quite a bit about changing the rules that we play the game by. Venus is about fun, right? And Venus and Capricorn, you have to think, like I said, Saturn is exalted in Libra. So Saturn and Venus actually kind of like each other. They actually have a cool relationship. So Venus in Capricorn, Venus likes playing by the rules. Venus likes doing things by the book, right? Venus likes doing the traditional kind of stuff. But there's a change to that system, right? Now, what's important about this retrograde is, remember how I said earlier, Venus is stationing retrograde on Pluto, right? That's a really, really big deal, because Venus is going to pretty much hang out and station retrograde conjoining Pluto. That is dramatically going to change the flavor of this Venus retrograde. And let's kind of break down what Pluto is going to signify. Now, Pluto is a little bit more of an extreme planet. The big thing here is Pluto isn't a visible planet. It's an outer planet. You can't really see it with the naked eye, and is much more referred to as a generational planet. So while it is a really, really big deal and it's really powerful, and we're going to go over that, it's only really important for when you have specific, like super specific transits on top of it, which, I mean, we're having at this time, but it's not always the biggest deal in the world. Anyway, I know some of you are going to get mad at me for downplaying Pluto, but anyway, Pluto represents power, control, fear and paranoia, destruction and extremes. Pluto loves taking things to extremes. Pluto's also going to be very transformational. Now, my followers that have been, listening for a long time know I don't say that word lightly, but Pluto can be very transformational because it represents changes. Like Pluto really uproots everything and makes things very, very extreme. So you have to think Venus is going to be retrograding, conjoining Pluto. So maybe if Venus retrograding in Capricorn is a change to the rules, right? A change in the system, a change in the way that we play the game, that might be because, again, Venus is going to rule value and pleasure, and it's retrograding, so it's going to change or redo. Maybe because of some fears or over extremes, or you go through some type of transformation in the area in which Venus is going to retrograde. But I would assume that this change is going to happen because of Pluto, meaning because of something, for one, it could be over a fear. It could be taking things to an extreme. Pluto also rules things like corruption and things just like falling apart and not working anymore. Pluto also rules power, so it could just be about what's empowering for you. Okay, now, so let's break down step by step, phase by phase of this Venus retrograde and what it actually means. Now that we know what a retrograde is, we know what Venus signifies, we know about the Pluto stuff, let's actually get into this. Let me press all of the right buttons here. Go gadget tablet. So like I said, Venus will go through Sagittarius, enter Capricorn, hit shadow. Again, Venus is going to hit shadow at 11 degrees Capricorn is where she will enter shadow. That's going to be, again, November 18th, 2021. Let's talk a little bit about this. What the Venus shadowing phase or Venus entering shadow phase is going to really represent is all of the themes beginning to develop. If Venus in Capricorn is like enjoying a certain system or doing things through a certain tradition, right? Like Venus in Capricorn is like playing by the rules, right? This is maybe where that is more emphasized. So playing the game through a certain set of rules, doing something that you enjoy through a certain traditional way of doing it, right? Thinking that's the best mode of operations. But as Venus enters shadow, you're going to feel like things are going to change. Oh, and they will. So, right, Venus enters shadow, she'll come right back to the spot. Don't forget about that. Venus will then slowly throughout that next month get to where she's going to station retrograde. She'll slow down, really come to a halt at 26 degrees Capricorn, and then begin actually moving backwards on December 19th, 2021. Again, this is also conjoining Pluto, but this is when all of the Venus retrograde things actually begin. So, for example, if during the Venus in shadow phase, you were doing things by a certain tradition or a certain rule book that you're used to doing, by this point you go, there's something's not right about this. Essentially, as Venus stations retrograde conjoining Pluto, a lot of the change begins. Change in what you enjoy, change of value, is a really big thing. I think I just put change of what you enjoy twice. That's fine. That's a big thing. That's why I said it twice. Remember that. This is where I think you're really going to start to value things differently. This is a change in the game, right? That's a really big deal. And this is conjoining Pluto. This is like, maybe the game's corrupt. Maybe there are no rules to the game. Maybe, you got to do what you got to do. But I also think Pluto in Capricorn is like, systems don't always work the way that they're designed to. And I think Venus retrograding on top of Pluto is allowing for that change to occur. This could be like a power thing. This could be a fear thing. But a big thing about Venus stationing on Pluto could be like your relationship to fear is changing. Your relationship to, again, the way that the rules that you play, and it's on Pluto. Like this could be an empowering thing for you. Like you could feel literally empowered by maybe not playing by the rules anymore. Maybe that's what you need. I don't know. Anyway, Venus stations on Pluto, and that's going to happen again on December 19th, 2021, right before we go into the new year. And then Venus will slowly retrograde and continue the retrograde motion. We will essentially continue that theme of change, continue that theme of doing things differently until we get to January 8th, 2022. That is the Venus Cazimi. That is the midway point happening at 18 Capricorn. So what this is essentially going to look like is the clarity, the acceptance of that change, right? As Venus is retrograde, maybe it's like doing something new and you're not used to it. At this point, there's this sort of acceptance because I think you're going to be realizing what you need to change and what you don't like. I think you're going to be realizing, if you're making a change or if something is changing, your taste of change is like, this is where you start accepting it, really. Maybe start shifting your value somewhere else. This also could be where you start releasing things, right? Venus is conjoining the sun, essentially purifying her energy. But this is really where I think the new rules to which you're doing, the new system in which you're applying really starts to set in. So that again happens on January 8th, 2022. That's that midpoint, 18 degrees Capricorn. Then Venus will continue to move backwards and move retrograde until she stations direct right where she entered shadow at 11 degrees Capricorn on January 29th, 2022. So that first month of 2022 is Venus retrograde the whole time. It's mostly January is just the Venus retrograde. Now Mars will also be in Capricorn too, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. But as Venus stations direct, what I wanted you to see is that's when Venus enters shadow, right? Venus stations direct right where Venus enters shadow. So first she entered shadow at 11 degrees Capricorn back on November 18th, 2021. And then she came right back to the other side of the sun, but right back at that same degree on January 29th, 2022. As Venus stations direct, what essentially is going to be going on then is this is where we're kind of getting used to those changes and really like enjoying the new way of that we're doing things, right? So Venus is again like fun and enjoyment, and retrograde is like a change, or what a good way to look at it is like a change in taste, a change of flavor, a change of what, you know, pleasures you is a funny way to put it. Venus stationing direct is like really getting adjusted and used to the new thing that you're doing, right? This is moving on. There's pursuing new plans and interests, embracing new plans, implementing new rules to the game. And what's really important about this is pursuing new achievements and desires, right? Like Venus is what we want. And as Venus, you know, goes through Capricorn and is in shadow, we're going to go like, we're going to kind of do something thinking we want something this way. And then Venus is going to station retrograde on Pluto where we realize, oh, we actually don't want it that way. Man, I could have totally used the insert in sync joke. That's really hard to say. Insert in sync joke. You're going to want to do it. You're going to want to change what you want, right? Venus will go retrograde. And then by the time Venus stations direct, I think you're going to be pursuing new achievements and desires. You're going to be wanting different things at this time. And so then once Venus stations direct and you start pursuing those new desires, well, that's what you do. And Venus will go through shadow again, but this time with Mars. And Venus and Mars for a whole month from January 29th. Well, it's actually from February 12th. I didn't write this down, but just remember from February 12th to essentially here, Venus and Mars are conjoining each other almost exactly. And we really haven't talked about Mars, so let's talk about that. Here's the thing with Mars. Mars rules energy and drive and ambition, right? What you're doing, what you're like engaged in. But Mars is a malefic planet. It's a bad planet technically. So it rules things like fights and conflicts and anger. But mostly Mars is what we're doing and how we're doing it for sake of ease right now. But let's talk a little bit about Mars in Capricorn, because that's actually a very specific Mars. You see, Mars loves Capricorn. They're buddies. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, right? Mars is one of favorite signs. One of Mars's favorite signs to be in is Capricorn. Let's talk about why. Mars is all about doing things efficiently and effectively in Capricorn, right? Think Mars is energy and drive and ambition, what we're doing, right? And if Saturn, more specifically Capricorn, is like plans and rules, man, if you give Mars, someone with, you know, all this energy, a little bit of, and all this ambition, like a plan and a set of like things to kind of do, that person can probably get a lot done. Doing things efficiently and effectively, taking action through some type of discipline or a structure or having a plan, having to work hard and put a lot of effort in, but getting a lot out. Like Mars in Capricorn is kind of a workhorse, which some people don't really like, but you know, you do get a lot out of it. But what essentially I really want to bring up here is Mars is just going to bring more energy here in Capricorn in general. So Mars and Venus are essentially going to be holding hands and exactly conjoining each other for quite some time. And as Venus goes over the spot of the sky again, right? We're going back over shadow. We're doing things over again for the third and final time. We're pursuing new desires, but this time it's super duper ramped up with Mars. It's super duper energized with Mars. It's like we're doing it again, but this time we have our coffee and the coffee's kicked in and we're ready to go. And we're kind of doing things in a much more intense, maybe extreme way. Now, Mars in Capricorn can make it a little bit, you know, intense in the bad way. Mars does rules fights and conflicts, but if Venus is enjoying the game, like Mars and Venus conjoining, that's super competitive, right? Like a fun competitiveness. I think this is going to be very motivating is a good way to put it. But anyway, once Venus stations direct, she'll move together with Mars going over everything again, but this time on a really intense way, on a really like pretty much think from November to December, you're going to feel certain way about something going, okay, I want this, but maybe I don't. And then December, you're going to realize you don't want that. And you're going to change what you want. You're going to change what feels good. And then once we get to the end of January, you're really used to that change and you've accepted that change. And then you're going after those new things, but this time with Mars, right? Like much, much, much more energized. And it's like, you know, when you know what you want, it's much more motivating to actually go get it, right? When you're just clear about it. And I think that's what a lot of this Venus retrograde is. And what's important is Venus leaves shadow. This is when Venus leaves shadow, March 1st, March 2nd of 2022 at 26 Capricorn. Again, conjoining Mars, but also conjoining Pluto. Now, the hard part about this is you have to remember Pluto rules power, Pluto rules fear and transformation. So by the time Venus and Mars come right back to Pluto, where maybe, Venus stationing retrograde on Pluto is like not liking something and having a lot of fear about it, or having a lot of fear and having to change the game of the rules or break the rules. Venus with Mars coming back to face Pluto is kind of this like epic showdown of energy. For some people, that's going to be a lot. For other people, it's going to be a lot in a good way and feel really, transformational and be that thing that they need. For other people, this is going to be a lot to take on. But as Mars and Venus, are together, where if Venus is about having fun and enjoyment, and Mars is like what we're doing and taking action on, it's very competitive, very sporty. It's in Capricorn, right? We have a plan, we have a system, we're doing something really serious, and it's going to conjoin Pluto, and we're going to take it to an extreme by the time we get back to March 1st and March 2nd. Now, the thing is, too, again, this goes from November all the way to December, all the way to January, all the way to February, all the way to March. So although Venus only really retrogrades from December into January, the whole showdown really lasts from November, December, January, February, and March. So I think in general, this Venus retrograde is about, like, again, changing the rules to the game, transforming the rules to the game, going out of your comfort zone, facing some fears, and maybe if you're used to doing things traditional, breaking out of that tradition and doing things different, doing things new that you've never done before, really breaking that mold, right? I think this is really exciting. And I think all in all, just in general, Venus and Capricorn is like wanting to do things with the tradition, have a certain like rule set or a certain way of doing things that maybe Venus wants to do. But then as Venus stations retrograde on Pluto, we realize that's no good. We change the way that we want things. We change what our desires are. We change what we want our outcomes to be. And then Venus stations direct with Mars, and we move forward, and we get to pursue those new desires. We get to pursue that new way of doing things in a much more energized way. But now I want to talk about how it's going to be affecting each and every zodiac sign, because it's going to be affecting every single zodiac sign differently, and it's going to be showing up in different parts of your life. So let's jump into that. With Aries. So Aries, Venus rules over your second house of money and your seventh house of relationships. So whatever Venus is doing is going to be kind of describing what's going on in these areas. So since Venus is ruling your second house of money, it's going to be retrograding your 10th house of career, and pretty much how the public sees you, how the world sees you. This could even deal with your boss. But Venus being your second house ruler of money, retrograding in your 10th house, your relationship to money based on your career, based on how people see you, is going to change. But also Venus rules your seventh house of relationships. So this could even be like a certain boss might change, a certain coworker, not a coworker, a person that you work with, maybe like in tandem with, not necessarily just a coworker. Seventh house, though, also rules relationships, so marriage. And the 10th house is about like how the world sees you, and sometimes that could involve partnerships. So this could be a change in relationships on a really big level. I want you to think what was going on January through March of 2014. You're going to see a really big similarity to that. But Venus rules your second house of money and finances and possessions, and it's retrograding in your 10th house. So this could be like a delay in pay, a delay in bonus, or maybe you go from hourly to salary. We get to January 8th, and then that's where that Venus Cazimi is. And that's where a lot of clarity really becomes, where your relationship change to your work will really become clear. And then once Venus stations direct along with Mars, you're really putting a lot of energy forward now when it comes to your work and your career. And that might, come with some money, or working with someone, or again, maybe a change in your boss. I'm not really sure, but this is definitely mostly career related for the Aries risings. So going into Taurus, Venus is your ruling planet. So Venus rules your first house of your body, yourself, your image, who you are, what you look like. Venus also rules your sixth house of ill health, of bad health, of things breaking. The sixth house also rules like your habits, your routines, your day-to-day activities. So because Venus rules, it's literally your ruling planet, and it rules your sixth house of your work, your day-to-day activities, Venus retrograde is probably a pretty big thing for you. Venus is retrograding, though, in your ninth house of spirituality, astrology, far distance travel, like going to foreign countries, higher education, like college and not necessarily basic education. The ninth house also rules things like publishing too, so that's oftentimes comes up. But Venus retrograding in your ninth house, being your first house ruler, would be maybe something about your spiritual beliefs are changing, or maybe even your sixth house ruler of work. Maybe you go back to school or get some type of education that benefits your work or your health. I want you to think about what was going on from January to March of 2014. Venus also retrograded in Capricorn back then. So you could see a lot of similarities to then. But Venus ruling your first house of yourself, this could even be changing how you look. This could be traveling. This could be going to a different country for work. But that's essentially what it's going to look like. Then we get to the Venus Cazimi point, again, that halfway point for the Venus retrograde. And this is where maybe you have that spiritual change. You maybe have that change in your day-to-day habits and your routines, or you have that change in your work. And then by the time we get to the end of January, where we have Venus and Mars really starting to fly forward in your ninth house, maybe you're taking on a new spiritual journey. You're understanding more about yourself. Maybe you changed your habits and some health routines, and now you're starting to kick a little bit more ass by the time we get to the end of January. So getting to Gemini, Venus is going to be ruling your 12th house, which the 12th house is all about the subconscious. It rules secrets. It rules hidden enemies. It rules isolation and alienation. It's not necessarily a good house, but it's not the worst house to have Venus ruling. But Venus also rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, hobbies, activities, what you're into. But Venus is going to be retrograding in your 8th house. And the 8th house kind of sucks to talk about because it rules death. It rules other people's money. It rules shared resources and investments. It rules inheritance. It rules taxes. So this is going to look a few different ways. One, Venus ruling your 12th house of hidden things and things that you didn't see, retrograding in your 8th house of like accidents. This could be like a hidden expense that you didn't see, or maybe someone breaks something of yours that you didn't know, or this could literally just be like something that just kind of comes out of the blue. Venus retrograding in your 8th house, your relationship to death, your relationship to other people's money, your relationship to other people's resources. Honestly, this can just signify a really deep change too, like in your subconscious, in your psyche. Venus also represents your 5th house though, of like your personal interests. And that's retrograding in the 8th house. So maybe you get into something that maybe you weren't into before. That could be something like being like, oh, I didn't know I was into this. I didn't know I liked this. And it just requires like a change of like opinion for you. Venus also rules or I should say the 5th house also rules love and romance and sex and pleasure. So this could be a big change to your relationship to love and sex in general. This also rules the 5th house of kids. So something could happen to a kid too if you're a parent. Then as we get to January 8th, that's when we're going to have that Venus Cazimi. And this is when all that clarity really begins of like, okay, this is something like, okay, you're getting into something new. You're understanding something new. And then once we get to Venus stationing direct with Mars and they all begin to move forward, this is really going about that 8th house stuff in a completely different way, right? The 8th house is like scary and it rules other people's money and shared resources, right? And death. And I think now that Venus is going back direct with Mars, there's this sense of going after this area with a little bit more energy, with a little bit more, really energy is a good way to put it. But I would assume that your relationship to the 8th house is really going to change. So things like death, things like other people's money, paying off debt, shared resources, investments, all of that's really going to change. Which that leads us to Cancer. So Cancer, Venus is going to rule your 11th house of friends and communities, networks, big groups of people. And Venus is also going to rule your 4th house of your home, your family, your living situation, where you come from, like your roots and your heritage. Venus is going to be retrograding in your 7th house of, you guessed it, relationships. So the big thing here, since the 7th house rules individual relationships and like marriage and like other partners and things like that, Venus rules your 11th house of friends and it's retrograding in your 7th house of relationships. So maybe a friend turns into a relationship. This could turn into a relationship change with friends. Like maybe you stop becoming friends with people, or a specific individual friendship dynamic changes with an individual, right? That was a friend. Venus, though, also rules your fourth house of your home and your family and your living situation. So Venus retrograding could indicate you moving in with someone. Venus being your fourth house ruler of family, retrograding in your seventh house, this could indicate something going on with the parents, something happening to a parent. So that happens on December 19th, and then we get to that Venus Cazimi. I think this is what you gotta, like, again, Venus going through Capricorn is like being like, oh, this is what I want, and then Venus stations retrograde, maybe around this Venus Cazimi is kind of realizing what opinions might have changed about friends and what opinions and what desires might have changed about your living situation. And then by the time we get to January 29th, Venus and Mars are going to be flying forward through your seventh house. And I think this is where you're going to be engaging within relationships in a completely different way, especially friendships, especially with your family. This is totally engaging with a specific individual in your life on a completely new dynamic after shifting the way in which you interact with that person. So then we get to Leo, and Leo, Venus is going to rule over your third house of, I kind of hate talking about the third house, and I always complain about it because it just rules so many different things. The third house rules siblings, it rules short distance travel, it rules neighbors, people that are around you, how you utilize like your knowledge and like what you know, like how you put it to use. But Venus also rules your 10th house of your career, your public vocation, how people see you, how the world sees you. And Venus is retrograding in your 6th house. While the 10th house rules like how the world sees you in your public like facing career, the 6th house is like work that goes unseen, the actual labor that you put into your work. So as Venus, the 6th house also rules health. It also rules coworkers. It also rules day-to-day activities and habits. The 3rd house also rules like your schedule too. Don't get that confused. Like the 3rd house is like your errands and the 6th house is like the habits that you want to break. Venus retrograding in your 6th house, I think employment's going to change. I think your relationship to your work, your relationship to your career, your relationship to what you do every day is going to really dramatically change. This could even be a really big change with a sibling or a neighbor. But Venus is going to station retrograde on Pluto, and I think there's a really big, powerful, dramatic change with like your employment status or with, the position that you hold in your work. And I think this Venus retrograde is just shifting that. This Venus Cazimi is when you kind of realize what you kind of want more out of your work and out of your time. And I think as Venus stations direct with Mars and moving forward, you're really starting a whole new style of work. You have a completely different relationship to your work that I think definitely benefits your title, definitely benefits the way that you present yourself to the world, and also makes your schedule nicer. I think that's going to be really important, this Venus retrograde, is getting your schedule in a much more fun position. So that leads us to Virgo. Virgo, Venus is going to rule over your 2nd house of money and finances and resources and possessions and like what you own and what you have, right? And Venus also rules over your 9th house of your spirituality, your religion, far distance travel. So Venus is changing these topics up, right? And Venus is retrograding in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, children. I want you to think about what was going on between January and February of 2014, because this is going to be a really similar time because that was the last time Venus retrograded in Capricorn. But anyway, Venus is retrograding in your 5th house of love, romance, sex, children, pleasure. So I think your relationship to these topics is going to change based on 1, money and what you have and what you own and what you possess, but 2, your beliefs, your experiences, maybe your education, and you maybe get more educated on topic and change like what your desires are, what you're into. But the 5th house really rules desire and wants and pleasure and sex and stuff like that. So I think that whole thing is really changing. By the time we get to January 8th, I think you realize the different things that you want, like the taste of the change in taste that you really have. And then by the time Venus and Mars, Venus stations direct and Mars is there and they start flying forward through your 5th house, I think you're really going about pleasure in a completely different dynamic. And I think you're spending maybe more money on it. I think your beliefs around pleasure and fun have completely changed at this time. Really think about 2014. Which that leads us to Libra. Libra, Venus is your ruling planet. It rules you, your body, your image, what you look like, how you represent yourself, how the world perceives you. Venus also rules your 8th house, though, of death. It rules death, inheritance, other people's money, shared resources, investments. And Venus is retrograding in your fourth house. So this is a big deal. The fourth house rules home, family, living situation, parents. And because Venus is your ruling planet and it's retrograding in your fourth house, you are probably going to move. Your relationship to your family is changing. Your relationship to your parents is changing. Your relationship to your living situation is changing. So you're probably moving. But Venus also rules your eighth house. This could involve a death. This could involve some inheritance. This could involve some money somehow, or somehow this could involve a shared resource of some point. But as Venus stations retrograde, your relationship to all these three things are changing. That leads us to the Venus Cazimi. I think this is what when you realize like what has changed about that. I think this is when you kind of go like, okay, this is what I want. This is how I feel about my family and how I feel about all that kind of stuff. And then once we get to Venus and Mars, or I should say Venus stationing direct with Mars, and they start moving forward, I think this is when you'll have much more energy for your home and your living situation. You'll be much more energized from your living situation. You might even look different. Your relationship to your parents, your living situation's changed. And again, there's some eighth house thing coming here. So whether it's shared resources, or it's just a scary change, or maybe it involves a death, maybe it involves an inheritance of some sort. So that brings us to Scorpio. Scorpio, Venus rules your 12th house. The 12th house rules isolation, alienation, hidden enemies, repressed and unacknowledged parts of yourself, things that you don't usually see. And Venus also rules your 7th house of relationships, other people, individuals, more specifically individuals in relationships in your life. And Venus is going to be retrograding in your 3rd house of short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, people around you, your schedule. Short distance travel, can't hit on that enough. So I think as your 12th house ruler is going retrograde in your 3rd house, is maybe you have like a really problematic neighbor that bothers you, or maybe your sibling is really problematic, because also the 12th house rules hidden enemies, but the 7th house rules open enemies and who you could see. And I mean, Venus retrogrades are already like a relationship dynamic change, but Venus is literally ruling your 7th house of like literal relationships. And then also your 12th house of like hidden enemies. So I really think this is just going to be about like how much time do you spend with people? Who do you spend time around with? Like, or who are you around the most? And I think maybe someone, might be deceiving you maybe in some way. This might be a relationship change with a sibling again, or with a neighbor, or you might spending more time with a specific individual in your life. We have the Venus Cazimi. This meant to be Libra. So, this meant to be Scorpio. So let's just pretend this is Scorpio rising. This is still happening in your 3rd. This is when everything kind of gets realized. And then once Venus stations direct with Mars and they start moving forward, I think because the 3rd house rules like your schedule and like how you utilize what you have and what you know. So I just think as Venus stations direct at the end of January with Mars, you're just kind of doing a lot of different things. Like, I think you're going to have maybe more or less time with someone. Like I think Venus retrograding in your 3rd house. I just think you might maybe you're hanging out with someone often and you stop, or maybe you're not hanging out with someone and you start hanging out with someone like a neighbor or a sibling much more. And then maybe because of that you have more energy. The 3rd house is a really weird house because the 3rd house rules like, again, short distance traveling, basic education, siblings, people around you. So it's just one of those things that you really have to keep an eye out for it. Sagittarius, Venus is going to rule your 11th house of your friendships, your networks, your communities, people that you involve yourself with, typically from work. But Venus also rules your 6th house of day-to-day routines, health, habits, your labor that you put into your work. And if you're a Sagittarius rising like me and you have your midheaven in Libra, then this also affects your career too. And so Venus rules, again, 11th house, sometimes of career, but networks, friends, communities, and 6th house of habits, work, labor, health. And Venus is going retrograde in your 2nd house of money. So for one, your relationship to money is changing, and ownership and possession, since the 2nd house rules ownership and possession and money. Venus rules your 6th house of work and day-to-day activities, and it's retrograding your 2nd house of money. So I think your relationship to money is going to change based off the work that you're doing. And because Venus rules your 11th house of friends, and if you're like me and have a midheaven in Libra, this is going to be a kind of a career change almost in a sense, or a status change that might represent a different change in income, or how you make money, or what you do with your money, or how you spend your money. That Venus will retrograde, and then once we have the Venus Cazimi, I think this is where your desires for what you want, for what you want to own and what you want to have in your relationship to work and your relationship to friends changes. And then by the time Venus stations direct with Mars, you're probably spending more money at this time, utilizing your money more at this time, maybe spending more time recreationally with friends, and spending more time working too, doing more creative projects. So then we get to Capricorn, and Capricorn, Venus rules your 10th house of your career, of your public, how the people see you, right? What you're known as. But Venus also rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, desire, creativity, what you own, or what you, your personal interests. Anyway, Venus is going to be retrograding in your 1st house. The 1st house rules yourself, your image, your identity, how you view yourself, how the world views you, how you view the world. So for one, with Venus ruling your 10th house of career, retrograding in your 1st house, this is, easy one is this is a career change. The world's going to be seeing you differently in some way. So this could be a title change of some sort. But Venus also rules your 5th house of love, romance, and sex. So this could be like literally changing your sexual identity, changing your opinion about things that you want, or Venus ruling looks and aesthetics. This could be literally changing the way that you look. Venus also rules your 5th house of, again, creativity. So maybe you're being more creative. Really, this just looks like a big change in what you either look like, how the world sees you, or what you're into. Venus will be Cazimi. I think this is, again, that moment where you kind of realize, yes, I'm changing, and yes, I like different things now, and I'm doing something different, and I am someone different. And then Venus will station direct and move forward with Mars, where you're really energized by the end of January in this kind of new way of seeing yourself, and you're really taking a lot of action from that. So that leads us to Aquarius. Aquarius, Venus rules over your 4th house of your home, your living situation, your family, your roots, your heritage. And it also rules over your 9th house of your spirituality, your religion, your higher education. It rules publishing too. And Venus is going to be retrograding in your 12th house. Now, the 12th house rules things like isolation, alienation, repressed, and unacknowledged parts of yourself. So the fact that Venus rules your 4th house, your 4th house ruler is going retrograde in your 12th, I think you're going to be spending more time alone, maybe more time in hibernation, spending more time at home. Venus retrograding in your 12th house, I think your relationship to your private spaces and your relationship to isolation in general is going to change, because Venus also rules your 9th house of traveling and spirituality and, seeing things in a bigger way. And so I just think this is going to be a very subconscious time for you. Like, you're going to be very inwardly reflecting. I think you're going to spend more time by yourself. The 12th house does sometimes rule illness, so maybe you're just not feeling good. But I think, you're just going to be kind of changing a little bit more of the inner machinations of your mind. And I want you to think, what was going on between January and February and March of 2014? It was the last time Venus retrograded here. And you might see a very similar theme to what was going on then, now. We'll get to the Venus Cazimi, and I think this is kind of like a spiritual breakthrough, or really kind of getting a clarity of what's going on in your head, or what's going on in your mind, because I think there's going to be some stuff that kind of gets dug up during this time in your subconscious. Like, I think you might be questioning your beliefs more. You'll be spending a lot of time at home, so make sure you get outside. But then Venus will station direct with Mars, and they'll begin to move forward, where I think you're just going to really work some stuff out in your subconscious, really maybe get some work done alone. Maybe that's the best way to spend your time. And again, this could also represent just like your relationship to your home life changing, and maybe you gain a different private space that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. Maybe a study, since the 9th house. Anyway, we get on to Pisces. Pisces, Venus rules a really weird part of your chart, because Venus rules your 3rd house of your day-to-day errands, your schedule, your siblings, your neighbors, short distance traveling, just kind of all around what you're kind of doing. But Venus also rules your 8th house of shared resources, of death, change, transition, investments, inheritance, other people's money, death. I don't know if I already said that, probably did, but again, death. Really weird places in your chart, right? But Venus is retrograding in your 11th house of friendships, of community, of networks of people. So I think as Venus is retrograding in your 11th house, I think your relationship to your friends is going to change no matter what. But I think also because Venus rules your 8th house, the boundaries within those friendships are going to change. And I also think because Venus rules your third house, how much time you spend with your friends, how much, short distance traveling you spend with your friends, what you do with your friends, and what kind of connects you guys is also going to change. And then once we have the Venus Cazimi, I think this is when you kind of realize, all right, like this is where I kind of, my boundaries with my friendships right now. And as Venus stations direct with Mars, I mean, Mars rules your second house of money, in your ninth house of spirituality and belief. Mars is going to be conjoining Venus, and they'll be flying through your 11th house, where I think you might be, I think, again, honestly, you're just going to be changing your friends, honestly, and then really spending maybe more time or spending time differently with your friends by the end of it. So that is this Venus retrograde for you guys. If you have made it this far in the video, congratulations. Not a lot of people have, but I really want to know, what are you guys really looking forward to with this Venus retrograde? Or what are you not looking forward to with this Venus retrograde? I definitely want to know what your guys' thoughts and opinions are in the comments, but this video has definitely taken up all the time that it's needed to, and I definitely need to take this to it. And so if you don't know me already, my name is Cam White. Thank you for being here. If you're into these kind of videos and definitely want to see more, please consider subscribing to my channel, as well as check me out on Patreon, where I offer monthly horoscopes, as well as early access and ad-free content, and other exclusive content as well. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next time.